Hey, how are you? Great to hear. Yeah, come in. Make yourself comfortable. Like a drink? Sure. There you go. Welcome to the Tech Lounge. Shall we begin? Welcome to the Tech Lounge with me, Christian Chella, recording this intro in an Airbnb in Lisbon, where, unsurprisingly, as always, every time I try to record something, there is a building site happening next to me, and they eventually be pretty quiet. But right now, of course, at this precise moment, I decided to record this introduction. They seem to be making the most noise. I can hear it. Hopefully you can't, but I will make it as brief as possible. This is an interview with Chad Whitacre of Sentry, talking about Sentry's infamous, some would say positive, some would say negative, some would say controversial, some would say business necessary open source policy. This includes their functional source license as well as the open source pledge. It's an interesting topic. I tried to be as pragmatic as possible in this interview, when it would be very easy to maybe fall down on one side or the other. Chad is an interesting guest, and I hope you enjoy the conversation we had, I think sort of late summer last year. One of my most popular videos is an old one now on Mermaid, the markup language that lets you create diagrams, flowcharts, and all sorts of other things using a markup language. So you can mix it with Markdown, LaTeX, ASCII-Doc, etc., etc. It's used in a lot of static sites and documentation, and a lot of people like it because you can basically version images. Mermaid is open source and free, but some of the maintainers behind it have now created a new company called Mermaid Chart that turns Mermaid into a commercial enterprise tool with team features, more visual interface, AI diagrams, infinite canvas, whiteboard, all sorts of other cool features. Now, if you're interested in finding out more, I have a link you can follow to get a discount off a paid plan and, of course, earn a little bit for the show. Head on over to go.christianchiller.com/mermaid chart. It is audio only. If you were going to show something, there may be a reason to video, but also if there was, I'd have to you'd have to like regenerate the link anyway. So let's just stick audio. So
perfect.
Yeah. So you mentioned you were playing saxophone. Is that
well? I keep it sitting out because if it's not sitting out, then I play it even less than when it's sitting out.
It's sort of the same theory with my drum kit here, but I don't know.
Do you play regularly?
Not as regularly as I'd like. I teach it more regularly than I actually practice, probably, which is weird. Saxophone is also equally antisocial.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I was actually, there's a great podcast, another great podcast called Tape Notes, where they often get artists in and then break down how they record an album. And I was listening to one with a British hardcore band called I'm completely blanking. Somebody Carter or the Rattlesnakes, and I'm completely blanking on the guy's first name for some reason. But they were talking about how they'd added saxophone. I was like, what? And then you listen to the playback, and they'd added the saxophone through so much processing, it ended up sounding like overdriven cello or something.
Yeah.
But it was kind of interesting. Anyway, so there we go. All right.
All right.
Anyway, yeah. Why have I completely... Frank Carter and the Rattlesnakes. Something like that. Anyway, doesn't matter. We are actually here to talk. I've actually wanted to have someone from Sentry for a little while because your name has come up in some other conversations. I spoke with somebody from Git Butler a little while ago, and they
Scott,
follow. I think so.
Yep.
Oh, actually, maybe not. But I did meet him at FOSDEM earlier this year, anyway. But because they use this same license that is from Sentry originally. But so your name has come up a couple of times, and I've wanted to talk to someone about this. But let's actually go back a step. I think Sentry is fairly well known in the kind of dev tooling space. But for those who don't know what Sentry is, what is Sentry?
Yeah, let's start there. Sure. So first of all, my name's Chad Whitacre, and I'm head of open source at Sentry. And thank you for having me on the podcast.
I always
Chris.
forget to do introductions. Sorry.
No worries. No, we're diving right in. I love it. So Sentry is an application monitoring company, error monitoring, performance monitoring. Started life as an open source side project in 2008, a tiny little 70-line Django plugin. And, grew for years just as an open source side project, kind of community, non-commercialized side project. Lightly commercialized 2012, venture capital in 2015, relicensed in 2019 from BSD to BSL, business source license, relicensed again in 2023 to the functional source license, which is a license that we wrote. And then a couple months ago, we announced this fair source initiative, which kind of bundles up FSL with BSL and FCL, another new license. So that's maybe a quick arc on the licensing, but yeah, Sentry, developer tools company, error monitoring, application performance monitoring. So 2015 is really the beginning of Sentry's growth as a company. That's when the founders, Chris and David, took venture capital and started hiring all their friends. I was actually a customer at the time, and they were a customer of mine at the time. It wasn't until 2020 that I joined the company. So I am coming up on 4 years next week at Sentry. So I've been here for 4 years. Joined the open source team and then became head of open source. Is that good for an intro?
Yeah, but do you know what the origin story? I'm always interested to know why people decide to start companies. Do you know the story of where it came from in the first place?
Or
the project.
Again, the project's much older than the company. So 2008, so David Kramer is our technical co-founder, and he's still with the company, so still founder led. And so I report to David. So he'd be the best one to give you all of this info. But it was 2008, and he was active in the Django community, the Python, kind of early Python community, and had this problem that he wanted to find out when his application crashed, and didn't want to find out from emails from customers, angry phone calls from customers. He wanted to find out before that. So he just wrote this whole 70-line plugin that captured exceptions and dumped them in the database. So I think it was originally called like Django DB log or something like this. So instead of having to kind of grep through logs, you could get this nice kind of structured exception report in your database, show up in the Django admin. So that was kind of the beginning of it. As with most open source projects, scratching an itch, solving an immediate problem,
exactly,
and growing from there.
And what is like the difference between the open source version and the version that the company makes money from then? Like what does it add on top?
So product wise, there's no difference. And that's one of the essential elements of our fair source approach that distinguishes it from open core, for example. Product wise, there's no difference. It's the same product, just packaged differently. We call it self-hosted. So there's a self-hosted repo that, knits together all of the parts that go into Sentry in a Docker Compose file that you can take and run directly for kind of smaller deployments, or use as kind of a blueprint for high availability deployments. But there's no product difference. It's a key feature for us.
Okay. So, I asked the stupid question, how does the company make money then? Is it from...
from hosting. So we have...
From hosting.
Earlier this year, we announced 100 million ARR and 100,000 cloud customers.
So it's going okay.
A little bit. Yeah, exactly. So we have 100,000 cloud customers, 100 million ARR. We've got over 10,000 instances that we know of self-hosted Sentry out in the wild.
Yeah. And it's actually interesting because as a company, you seem to have managed to sort of maintain this. Like no, it's not showing up, but here it is. No, right at the top of the website, application monitoring software considered quote unquote not bad by 4 million developers. And I think you sponsor a reasonable degree of podcasts and things like this. Like you're active in the broader community as well. You've managed to maintain a reasonably friendly facade. That sounds like I'm being passionate. But a friendly face, I don't know, to the company despite becoming commercially successful. Has that always been a considered effort, or?
Yeah, I mean, again, we're founder led. So David, is still, his role has changed over the years. He was CEO for a while, and then we brought in Millen as our CEO, and David's current role is Chief Product Officer. He was CTO, and we brought in somebody else. Anyway. So, I think one theme that I'm chewing on a lot, if we zoom out, leadership. I think leadership is so important. And, I'm reflecting a lot on kind of the stamp that a person puts on the organization.
Exactly.
So what you see is honestly kind of an outflow of David's personality, and everybody else in the company, that kind of, the company culture, right? That David and Chris have created, very designed. So Chris is a designer, Chris, our other co-founder. Okay. So all the, we have an amazing in-house creative team, the product design, the creative design, and kind of the cheekiness, and really the thorough, again, started life in 2008 as an open source side project. David was very much in the open source community and still, is a part of that. So, as much as any corporate brand posturing can be genuine instead of a facade, Chris, I think,
it was just
enjoying the moment.
It was just the first word that came to my head. And then I realized the implications of the words.
It's easy to get cynical, right? I mean, I think.
No, there wasn't meant to be. It actually wasn't meant to be.
Well, it's easy for me to get cynical. I'll own that, right? Yeah. And it is a unique company culture, and it's, I'll be the first. It's not going to last forever, right? Like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, it's going to be different. It's changed since I joined 4 years ago, but it is a great group of people. I think we've got something special, and we're having a lot of fun with it.
So let's go back to what you were discussing a minute ago, and kind of bring us up to the present day.
Yeah.
So the project has relicensed several times, and usually when someone relicenses one time, it causes enough problems and controversy. So let's go back to the beginning, though. So what you said, the first license was?
So the first license was no license. This is the era of just throw it up on GitHub, and who cares about licensing in 2008. 2009, there'd been enough traction and enough people asking for a license, that David put a BSD 3-clause BSD on it, permissive, right? Again, with the mindset, it's that sort of, in open source, we've got these two camps, right? The copy left and the permissive. And David and Sentry have always been definitely on the permissive side. We want, I'll just say that, on the permissive side. So no license, and then BSD, and then 2019. This is public. I'll go ahead and say it. It was GitLab. GitLab was about to launch a product, like a competing hosting service. Just taking, GitLab, of course, is the smorgasbord. They're like, we've got everything, right? And so they saw Sentry, and it's a BSD project. And of course, why not offer it to GitLab customers? Okay. And so that was a threat to our business at that point. And I wasn't here at the company at the time. There'd been 10 years of R&D effort that went into that. And now here's GitLab, ready to start offering a competing service to us with no intention or promise of participating in that. So that's the point at which we relicensed, and kind of the immediate reason for the relicense.
Let's come to what that license was in a second. It's interesting though, because it's funny. A lot of 2019 is actually kind of late in this journey. Like a lot of other companies relicensed before that, mostly concerned by competition from the kind of big hosting
Amazon,
companies.
Right? AWS.
So it's kind of interesting that you mentioned GitLab instead. It's like that's not one you hear very often.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
And so then you said it was the business license.
So we used the business source license, which was the one that MariaDB came up with in 2014 or whatever it was. So, and it worked, in the forum thread where we were discussing the relicense, somebody from GitLab showed up. I'm sorry, I forget your name if you're listening, showed up and was like, hey, I'm a product manager at GitLab, and we were getting ready to roll this thing out, and does this mean that we can't do this anymore? And David was like, yes, that is exactly what that means. It worked, and kind of took that pressure off us, took that kind of risk hanging over our heads as a company, and has allowed us to continue to build Sentry, to continue to thrive as a business and invest in the product. And again, with fast forwarding to well, okay, so that was business source license in 2019 and kind of the reason for that. 2023, the functional source license is just really a cleanup of the BSL. So it's structurally the same as our BSL implementation. But the way the BSL works, there's a giant fill in the blank right in the middle of it called the additional use grant, which means that every single implementation of the BSL is effectively a different license. Yeah. And what we wanted to do was kind of put some limits on that, constrain it, and say, this is just one thing, because that helps adoption. That helps companies that see FSL, the legal department of the company can have a blanket, whether it's yes or no, right? Like can have a blanket policy on FSL without encumbering the legal department with a full review of the license, which, BSL requires. So so FSL is very, is not really a departure from BSL for us. It was kind of a continuation and a deepening of our implementation of BSL.
It's kind of interesting because I guess the assumption would be that there was a second switch to be more restrictive, but actually kind of what you're saying was it sort of was, but it was to not necessarily be restrictive to what people could do with the product or the project, but to be more restrictive around people misusing the license.
Yeah, and I'll tell you,
which is actually kind of a more positive angle on things.
Yeah, I mean the second relicensing was definitely not like we saw with Cockroach. That they went to the BSL and then they went to this whatever exactly more restrictive, essentially proprietary license, and that was not our FSL is the same as our BSL. It's basically just like saying only this. There's no additional use grant. Yeah. It's our implementation of it, and it's actually less restrictive in that the BSL default is 4 years. So BSL is what?
Oh, it's actually time limited.
Exactly. So that's the key feature of the BSL is that it says, and this is honestly the key feature of fair source. So the two features of fair source as kind of a general movement or pattern. Number one is this minimally non-compete licensing. Number two is what's called delayed open source publication. And that term comes from a white paper, research paper that Sentry underwrote, but that the open source initiative conducted with some independent researchers. So, there's this white paper out there and they looked at this practice of what they call delayed open source publication. In other words, here's the thing today, and, at some point in the future, this artifact is going to become truly open source under an OSI approved license. Okay. So that pattern is so we ended up making that a key feature, core essential feature of fair source. So fair source is minimally non-compete licensing plus delayed open source.
Just explain that again. So you mean delayed open source in that you can issue something with a license that isn't open source yet, but you have to open source it within a certain time frame?
Yeah. So the way the FSL itself is written, the functional source license that Sentry is under today, there is a present grant of a future license, or there's some technical legal term for this. We could bring it up and read it if we wanted to, but essentially what it's saying is, this artifact, this source code artifact that you're looking at here. So it's versioned, right? It depends on versions. So the version of this software that you're looking at today, 2 years from the date that it's published, is available under the Apache license or the MIT license. Those are the two licenses available in FSL. So we're promising you today that we're granting you today this license that becomes effective in 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And then what that does is it creates the possibility for, if Sentry goes off the rails and really takes our product in some ridiculous direction that, the community and our users and the industry really, thinks is terrible. Platform decay and shitification is the spicy word for it, right? Cory Doctorow's term for it. If that happens, then at some point, when it's clear that Sentry's off the rails, we could say, you know what, I liked Sentry a lot better 2 years ago. And, sufficiently motivated actors in the ecosystem can take that 2-year-old version, fork it from there, and take it and evolve it in a different direction. So we're trying to find that balance between it's a head start license. It's saying Sentry as an organization, this is our core business. I think this is, I don't know. do we only have half an hour on the clock here, Chris? Because
not necessarily.
Okay. Because I mean, I was sort of prepped for a call about Pledge, the open source Pledge, and
we're getting there.
Okay,
we're getting there.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess I wanted to say is, open source is at this point the status quo for how the world builds shared infrastructure. But most of the world's software is still closed source.
Yeah, and you just don't know that.
You don't know it. It's not obvious. We don't pay attention to it. And so it sort of slips by. But think about, the great open source success stories. So something, obviously Linux, right? So Linux is open source, but Amazon Web Services is not open source, right? Or Kubernetes is open source, but Google Search is not open source. React is open source, but Facebook Newsfeed is not open source, right? Yeah. So Sentry, this is our core product. Like Google is an ad company, they're not a software company. Facebook is an ad company, they're not a software company. So, so they're not, they have no need to try and monetize this React thing or this Kubernetes thing, because that's not their product. That's not what they're building and they're selling. That's not the mission of their company. Sentry, that's our business. We're selling software. We're a software company. We're not an ad company. And, so we wanted to find this balance, and that's the balance that we've come up with between saying, it's a head start license, going back to that idea. Sentry, as an organization, we get a head start on commercializing this. But at the same time, 2 years from now, if things go off the rails, you can take that 2-year-old version, fork it. We actually have started to see a little bit of this happen with CockroachDB that we mentioned earlier, when they relicensed again to that more restrictive, whatever it is, proprietary license. Oxide, Brian Cantrell's company, Oxide, announced that they were going to start maintaining. Now it's their own fork. They're maintaining a fork of the Apache version of CockroachDB. They're not trying to lead it as a community project, but it sort of points in that direction, right? That like this is a real value of this model. But it'll take time to really prove that out, right? Because these things don't happen every day.
I could ask one more kind of question before we get to the where you are now with this. So, I am a very open source minded person, but I will admit that every time I go to an open source event and I walk into a room of people discussing licenses, my eyes roll a bit and I'm kind of like, oh, does it really matter? Well,
sure.
And of course, it matters to a lot of people, but to other people, it's just like, oh, it doesn't matter, but whatever. But so for those people who are probably maybe screaming at us right now or looking very unhappy. Yeah. So the argument might be is like, why do you need this? What is wrong with being proper, quote unquote, open source? What is wrong with the licenses we've had for decades in some cases that cover this and that and this and that? If you got into open source to be worried about someone making money out of your product, well, tough. So what sort of to counter that, like what would be a brief summary of why this is helpful and why this is necessary? And I guess sort of why now as well?
Yeah. So it's difficult to do because our focus is so much on open source and the licensing and we don't think about the preponderance of the world software that's closed source. That's not in view. With fair source and with the functional source license, we launched fair source a couple months ago now in August, beginning of August. And we've, if I have it right, there's like half a dozen of us that launched and we have one or two more since then. And the point I would offer here is that every one of those companies that has kind of signed on to fair source and kind of followed this path with us, Sentry and CodeCov, which is a Sentry product, so we bought CodeCov and actually CodeCov's an example too. Sentry's the only one. Everybody else besides Sentry in there, it was a closed source product that became fair source. Not an open source product that became fair source. That's really important. Fair source is an alternative to closed source. It's not an alternative to open source. It's an alternative to
this is
closed
what
source.
GitButler did, I think, as well.
Right. So GitButler was closed source, and there's sort of this instinct that's like, we really like to be open source, but it feels too risky for our company. So they were closed source, and fair source kind of gave them a safe enough option that they were able to open up to the extent that they were able to under fair source.
So the interesting perspective is to say to the kind of naysayers of not using these pure whatever that may mean, open licenses, is that, well, the perspective is actually we're helping those people who never thought about being open source, welcoming them in, and then maybe they will keep going and become more open. I think that's something that a lot of people said to me, actually, is we are considering maybe becoming more open in the future. And this is our gateway to it.
Well,
it's actually,
the other side of it is that open source for decades has had this tension in it. It's had these two parties in it, the commercial and the community. And this goes back to the beginning. This goes back to Netscape. The Netscape public license, which was the first open source license, in the sense that like they're the ones that launched, although it was never approved by the OSI or possibly never brought to the OSI for approval. It was asymmetric. It probably wouldn't pass today. In other words, so this tension between community governed projects and single vendor commercial open source has been there since the beginning. Part of what we're trying to do with fair source is take that pressure off of open source and say, let's stop, open source itself is about the licensing. Here's a definition and how it applies to licenses, and doesn't say anything about governance. In my view, Chris, I actually think governance should be thought of as essential to open source. Let's let open source refer to these genuinely community governed, multiple commercial actors involved. Let's let open source refer to that, and find something else, like move the single vendor commercial stuff off into a separate thing. So fair source is kind of a holding pen for that, so that we can let open source flourish more genuinely.
So now you mentioned the word flourish. Let's come to the next kind of big problem, which leads into the whole pledge.
Good segue.
Side of things. You threw it out there, so I had to go with it. One of probably the bigger. It's easy to get distracted by conversations of licensing, which are important to certain groups of people. But one of the biggest issues is often that there's just there's not enough people putting in the work versus the consuming. There's plenty of examples of projects where it's one person in their bedroom holding up the entire internet, et cetera, et cetera. So there's been many attempts to try and find better ways of funding these projects and these people. So give me a brief overview of what is the open source pledge trying to accomplish?
Sure. So the open source pledge, ultimately, what we're trying to accomplish is adding a zero to the budgets of all of the maintainers and foundations in the open source ecosystem. In a sad case, may add nothing to many of them if you're adding a zero. Add a zero to zero and you still got zero, I guess, right? Right. I mean, the goal is really to change the status quo in open source sustainability. So the pledge is a group of companies that are working together to do this, to change the status quo in open source sustainability, recognizing that, it's the companies with the money, and that needs to be kind of the beginning. We need to unlock that flow of funds to maintainers, to the person in their basement, the quote unquote Nebraska project, referring to that XKCD dependency comic. So that's the goal. So we launched the pledge on October 8th. So, not quite a month ago now, at time of recording. And there's really two parts to the pledge. The pledge is a group of companies. To join the pledge, step one is pay maintainers. Okay. Company goes and pays maintainers. Step two is blog about it. And the blog is really for two purposes. Number one is accountability, bring the receipts, show us who you paid and how much, so the community can kind of vet which companies are actually following through. So accountability. But then the other purpose of the blog is awareness. So, this is really all about social validation. This is all about, us as an industry changing what we're doing together. And that requires this marketing, right? This kind of, this validation, seeing that peer companies are doing this as well, participating in this together. So pay maintainers, blog about it. It's on an annual cycle. So the blog is like this annual report, and there's a minimum to get in the door. So the minimum to join the pledge is $2,000 per year per developer on staff, because it's the developers that your company that are made more productive by open source. Right.
Right. Okay.
And
so it's paying you take that amount that you're paying your staff and then give it to a project, or they're working on it?
It's a little decoupled. So it's the number. So if a company has 100 developers, employs 100 engineers, then their required payment is at least $200,000. So 2,000 times the number of developers on staff. So say a company has 100 developers, $200,000. They then go pay that $200,000 to maintainers of, it's up to them, right? Like to foundations or using ThanksDev or Open Collective or GitHub sponsors, right? To pay maintainers directly.
Okay.
So Pledge doesn't touch money. There's no flow of funds through us. We're trying to build the ecosystem here. There's already people doing those parts.
So it's more of an awareness raising. Exactly. So I was going to ask, like, how does it compare to things like Open Collective, et cetera? And the thing is, it's actually a funnel to those.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
GitHub sponsors.
Yeah, absolutely. ThanksDev, Open
one you
Collective.
just said, Open Collective, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
It's interesting because if I look down the list of member companies, I mean, it's less than a month old.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I don't recognize many of the company names, but maybe I don't expect to because this is.
Well, you can see a lot of them are
companies who care about open source, not necessarily massive kind of consumers or contributors to it already.
Yeah, exactly.
Laravel, obviously.
Right.
Button Down, I know, ironically, because I have a project that actually uses it.
Cool. Yeah.
And Git Butler, obviously.
Yeah.
Stack Bullets and yourselves.
Okay. So, yeah. I mean, look, like you said, this is early days. We're really, Chris, when I fly to San Francisco, I like to read embarrassingly cringy business books on the plane, and make sure everyone knows it. Just like, Innovator's Dilemma or like these classics. It's like, okay, guy, you're flying to San Francisco. So this, a couple of weeks ago, I was out there and I'm reading Crossing the Chasm. Right. Okay. This classic business book. But honestly, I do think it's the playbook for what we're doing. Right. Like we want to have this impact where, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there's thousands of companies that have joined the pledge, and it has added that zero, or created a budget for these maintainers and these projects. Obviously we're not going to get there in the first month, right? So how do we approach this? It's the whole bell curve where at the beginning you've got the innovators and then the early adopters, and then you have to cross the chasm to the early majority and the late majority, right? So very clearly here, we're at the beginning of this. And it'll take us a while to get there. The segments that we're going at, so we just launched. We've got 26 folks on the board today. It's sort of sinking in that I'm now a salesperson. And so which is.
So you're a salesperson for giving.
Yeah, exactly.
Encouraging them to give other people money.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. It's, my life's so weird. So I set up a CRM using GitHub Issues, which I'm really tickled about.
CRM with GitHub Issues?
Yeah, it's so fun.
That sounds intriguing.
Well, so GitHub Issues, so the way we have it set up, every issue is a company. So every company has one issue and it's long lived. Yeah. So it's like, as long as a company exists, the issue's there. And so you're just like, anytime you're emailing, you're reaching out, or there's an issue, you're putting your comments on there as kind of like your log of the history with the company.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Your CRM is GitHub Issues.
Yeah, exactly. We're using it. Yeah. Okay. We're assigning, different people, different account reps. Anyway, having fun with that. But it's really like, that's the name of the game, especially for the next 3 to 6 months, is outreach and getting people on board.
What is the level of accountability? Like it's very easy to see, I can see Sentry is giving, according to the pledge, about
dollars per dev,
400,000.
Yep.
I think. But, putting it on a table is one thing.
Yeah.
How do I then know you actually did it?
So if you click through on any of these members on the member companies page, you'll see a profile page. And then if you scroll down, you'll see these annual reports. Okay. Yeah. And that's where, and you can see read report.
Oh, this is the blog.
Correct.
So this is the blog.
Correct. Yeah. So that takes you, again, going back to that blog post, annual report, shows the receipts. Yeah. And the hope is that, we mentioned these platform partners, ThanksDev, Open Collective, GitHub sponsors. The hope is that those platforms can kind of evolve with this to help us with this, this receipts and this accountability.
Yeah, interesting. Yep. Has anybody else done this blog post yet? I guess not.
Oh no, everybody in here, everybody on this list, all 26 on this list. That's how you get in. So you come you come and you give us a pull request. You say, we just published this blog post. We'd like to be added to the pledge. So every company here is already published.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, now I can see.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, actually this do you actually set like a level of detail they have to go into? Because it seems fairly detailed.
I guess on the about page, let's see, number on the FAQs here.
Oh, here's that XKCD comic.
Oh yeah, of course. Number 5, what payments are eligible?
Yeah.
That goes into some pretty good detail.
Yeah.
We say the primary intent of the pledge is no strings attached payments to open source maintainers. Starting with that, here's some clarifications. Projects your company controls are out of scope, right? If you own the trademark, then that doesn't count for pledge, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So try to give some guidance to folks, trying to find that balance, right, between flexibility.
And just out of interest, like it's a nice kind of gathering of like-minded people, but just putting my skeptic's hat on again, how many of these people were already doing this? Or how many people did it because of the open source pledge?
That's a great question. I don't have, anecdotally, I'd say there are definitely a few on here that we had to kind of coach across the finish line, that wouldn't have, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but that wouldn't have, wouldn't be doing this without the pledge. And then kind of dialing back where I was a minute ago with this whole crossing the chasm thing and where we're at, definitely one of the segments that we'll be going after in the next 3 to 6 months is who are the people that are already doing this? If a company is already close to that threshold, come on, let's just get a blog post and let's get in the door, right? Get you in the door. But certainly long term, look, it's going to be when we get up market, right? It's going to be the larger companies with 5,000 developers or 10,000 developers 5 years from now or 7 years from now when it makes sense because this is demonstrated that it's meaningful. Think about what was it? Here's me with my crossing the chasm. Salesforce, was leading the charge with SaaS, right? They were this first early SaaS company, and nobody bought it, right? Everybody was like, no, I'm not putting all of my data in the cloud. That's.
And now look where we ended up.
Exactly. So SaaS's Salesforce big break was, I believe, it was Merrill Lynch, right? Merrill Lynch bought a contract for 10,000 developers to put their data in the cloud, and that was kind of the unlock for Salesforce. Yeah. So. Until we get that, that big win, it's just, executing on day to day and trying to get as many others in here as we can and to kind of build up to that big moment when it comes.
So if anyone is interested in finding out more, it's opensourcepledge.com.
That's it.
Pretty easy to remember. Yeah. Anything else on kind of, let's not necessarily go into specific Sentry roadmap, but anything else on the Sentry open source roadmap for the next 6 months?
Yeah. Wow.
You'd like to talk about?
Thank you. Yeah. So Fair Source and Pledge were the big two things that we were aiming to get done this year. So those are both launched. I'd say for the next 6 months, again, I'm in sales now. So that's the next 3 to 6 months for me. I think, honestly, I don't have anything big to announce for next year, where we're going to go from here. We wanted to get these out the door, but we'll certainly be pushing both of these further next year. Maybe I'll put this out there. One way I think I could see the pledge evolving in the future into next year. We've got this kind of structure on the company side. Okay, here's a minimum to get in, and here's some reporting requirements and some structure on that. We have, if you scroll to the very bottom, and it's on the homepage too, we have these endorsements from foundations in the ecosystem. OSI at the top and then on down. So we're in conversation with kind of the other side of this equation, right? With the foundations and the maintainers and the projects. My expectation is as this grows, we'll want to see some more structure on the foundation side. So how much of your budget goes to events and marketing versus legal versus accounting versus actually going to maintainers and developers? It's a chicken and egg, right? Because like they need the budget for that.
This is a whole other conversation.
Yeah. I'm interested to see, if we talk a year from now, where we might be. Excuse me, we can edit that out if we edit.
Yes, I do.
I'm interested to see a year from now where we're at with foundations, if they're more of a first class partner to the pledge, instead of just kind of an endorsement. But we'll see.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm sure some people will like some of what they heard, and others will not like some of what they've heard. I don't know.
Yeah,
but that's open source. It's a community, and everyone is entitled to different opinions.
That's it.
So
that's it.
Thank you very much for joining me,
Chris. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to chat.
No worries.
All right.
So that was it. That was our guest today. Thank you very much for joining me in the Tech Lounge. I have been Christian Schiller. If you want to know more about Tech Lounge, head on over to christianschiller.com, or please tell your friends about us. It's quiet and cozy in here, but the more listeners, the merrier. You can find more at christianschiller.com/podcast, or in the show notes or episode notes, wherever you found this podcast. Thank you very much for joining me, and you're most welcome next time.